Walter Pierce stood in the hushed confines of the courtroom, his palms resting on the table before him as he looked across the sea of curious faces. He was in his 50s, tall and composed, with a quiet confidence that seemed out of place for a defendant. The overhead lights buzzed gently, casting a pale glow against the polished wooden pews. In front of him, a uniformed officer named Colin Delgado was testifying in a stern, unwavering voice. Delgado's police badge gleamed as he raised a hand and pointed an accusing finger at Walter. "I saw him break into that tailor's shop. He jimmied the door with a metal rod," Delgado declared, a voice echoing across the silent courtroom. "He ran out carrying stolen goods. I chased him, but he escaped. That's the man, Your Honor. I'd stake my badge on it." A collective murmur ran through the onlookers. Neighbors, curious strangers, and reporters who sensed a sensational story in the making. The prosecutor smirked with smug satisfaction, as though the case was all but closed. Delgado, after all, had a near pristine record and a reputation as a rising star in the local police force. Judge Rosalind Hunt's gaze shifted from Delgado to Walter. Her brow furrowed. "Mr. Pierce," she said coolly, "do you have anything to say in your defense?" Walter slowly stood, smoothing the front of his gray sweater. He appeared almost too calm for a man being accused of burglary. His voice, steady yet resonant, sliced through the tension. "Your Honor," he said, "Officer Delgado is making a grave mistake. He's lying under oath, and he doesn't even realize that I am a retired foreign intelligence operative trained in advanced surveillance and defense." A ripple of shock coursed through the courtroom. Reporters scribbled furiously, cameras flashed, and a man in the gallery gasped so loudly it echoed off the walls. Delgado's face went rigid, and for a moment his composure cracked. His lips parted in disbelief, as though he couldn't comprehend how Walter Pierce, a man who looked more like a mild-mannered professor than a threat, could possibly be someone so dangerous. Judge Hunt's gavel struck the wooden block. "Order!" she thundered. "Let's have order in this courtroom." She turned to Walter. "You may proceed with whatever evidence you claim to have, Mr. Pierce." Walter's gaze was unwavering. "Thank you, Your Honor." He fished a small flash drive from his pocket. "I would like to submit this into evidence. It's footage from a personal security device I always carry. You'll see exactly what happened outside the tailor's shop." Delgado's complexion lost a shade of color as the prosecutor awkwardly made his way to the clerk, who plugged the flash drive into a laptop. Within seconds, a video feed played on a mounted screen. The audio was a bit muffled, but it showed Walter stepping out of a grocery store some blocks away from the alleged tailor shop burglary. Moments later, he was seen assisting an older woman who appeared to have fainted on the sidewalk. He called an ambulance, gave her water, and waited until help arrived. The timestamp matched the period Delgado insisted Walter had been breaking into the tailor's shop. The gallery erupted in gasps. The judge leaned forward. On-screen, Officer Delgado was nowhere to be seen near Walter, nor was there any sign of burglary. Then the footage caught something else, a sliver of movement in the distance. A figure wearing a police badge lurking by the tailor's shop, prying the door open himself. The angle wasn't perfectly clear, but it was unmistakably the silhouette of someone in uniform. The person rummaged inside, then quickly vanished. Judge Hunt's voice was icy as she addressed Delgado. "Officer Delgado, how do you explain this?" Delgado's hands balled into fists, but he remained silent. His stare shot daggers at Walter, and for a split second, Walter saw fear flicker in those eyes. Delgado was scared, and Walter knew why. "I've seen enough," Judge Hunt declared. "Officer Delgado, step down from the stand." She never finished. The double doors to the courtroom burst open, and 3 men in dark suits swept in, scanning every face with a certain predatory tension. One, a man with a bald head and a piercing gaze, locked eyes on Delgado. Delgado froze. Then, in a burst of desperate energy, he shoved past the prosecutor and sprinted for the exit. Chaos rang out. The judge hammered her gavel, shouting for order. Spectators stood, shouting questions, jostling for a better view. Walter wasted no time. An older friend once told him, "When trouble knocks, answer with speed." And that was exactly what he intended to do. He leaped over the defense table and took off after Delgado. Ignoring the startled bailiff who nearly dropped his paperwork, Delgado's footsteps echoed ahead, pounding against the polished floor. Walter pursued him with the agility of a man half his age, instincts honed from decades in intelligence. He remembered the swirl of adrenaline from long-forgotten missions, the thrum of his heart that told him to keep going. Doors flew open, furious shouts reverberated off marble walls. By the time Delgado hit the emergency exit, Walter was upon him. He launched himself forward in a tackle that slammed Delgado hard onto the ground, driving the air from the officer's lungs. Delgado groaned, fighting back, but Walter pinned him effortlessly. "You're finished," Walter growled under his breath. "Stop making it worse." Court officials and police swarmed the hall. Guns were drawn, aimed at Walter, until they realized Delgado was the one wearing cuffs. An older sergeant barked, "Stand down!" They lifted Delgado and cuffed him properly. He didn't struggle. At that moment, Delgado looked like a man who'd realized he had nowhere to run, no story that could save him. Judge Hunt appeared, her dark robes swishing around her ankles, lips set in a disbelieving line. "Officer Delgado," she said, "I'm placing you under arrest for perjury and obstruction of justice. We will sort this out further in a secure setting." Delgado glared at Walter. "You? You have no idea who you're messing with," he whispered. Walter's chest still rose and fell with adrenaline. "I have a pretty good idea," he said quietly, though the intensity in his eyes said, "I'm not backing down." When Delgado was led away, Walter lingered in the hallway, catching his breath. The men in suits who had barged into the courtroom were nowhere to be seen. He scanned the corridor, but it was empty save for a few startled clerks and bailiffs. Not over yet, Walter thought. Several hours later, he found himself in a Spartan interrogation room, but he was the one asking questions. Across the battered metal table sat Delgado, his uniform disheveled, his face pale with a mixture of shame and defiance. The fluorescent light overhead buzzed softly. Walter stared him down. "Officer Delgado, you were protecting someone. Who was it?" Delgado let out a humorless laugh. "You're a real piece of work, you know that?" Walter's gaze remained calm, resolute. "You tried to pin a crime on me. I want answers." Delgado ran a hand across his sweat-beaded forehead, silent. Finally he muttered, "I had no choice." Walter arched an eyebrow. "No choice? That's interesting. Everyone has a choice, even if it's between a bad one and a worse one." Delgado shuddered, glancing at the one-way mirror as though imagining who might be watching. When he spoke, his voice trembled. "The White Fangs," he whispered. Walter's chest tightened. He recalled scraps of intel he'd come across in his old work. The White Fangs, a clandestine network rumored to have its claws deep in local government, police forces, anywhere they could manipulate power. Narcotics, money laundering, bribery. There were an undercurrent of darkness. "How deep does this go?" Walter asked. "Deeper than you can imagine," Delgado replied. "Captain Morales, he's in on it. Nearly half the precinct is, too." He looked at Walter as though seeing a ghost. "You should have just let me pin you for that burglary, Pierce. It would have saved your life. Because if you start digging, you'll be dead before you can blink." Walter leaned in, steepling his fingers. "How exactly did you get involved?" Delgado's face contorted with shame. "I needed money. My father's medical bills were piling up. Morales offered to help, made me plant evidence on petty suspects who had no means to fight back. I never thought it would escalate. But then I saw something I wasn't supposed to, and they forced me to set you up for that burglary. Said if I didn't do it, they'd handle my family." Walter felt a pang in his chest. He loathed corruption, despised tyranny, but the desperation in Delgado's eyes was real. "Where do they meet? Where's the next exchange?" Delgado swallowed, his eyes dull. "Tomorrow night, the abandoned barge on Swan River. They're moving a weapons shipment. You go there alone, you won't come back." Walter stood, scraping the chair back. "They should be worried about me, not the other way around." Delgado stared at him, a mix of pity and fear in his eyes, as if to say, You don't know these people. But Walter Pierce had been in worse situations halfway across the world. He walked out of the room, determined to see this through, heedless of Delgado's final warning. Later that evening, Walter sat in the muted glow of a dusty reading lamp in his small apartment. A half-eaten sandwich lay untouched on the counter. Spread across the table were notes he'd compiled. A younger woman's photograph stood in a frame by his elbow, his adult daughter Lena, smiling warmly, taken during her college graduation. Walter whispered an old proverb he'd once heard: "When the wind howls, the wise build shelters." That photo reminded him of everything he wanted to protect in this life. He had once been an intelligence operative, the kind who specialized in infiltration, silent takedowns, and unraveling hidden threats. The White Fangs, with their infiltration of local law enforcement, reminded him too much of the black market circles he'd toppled years before. He recognized the patterns: money funneling, hush-ups, scapegoats. But if Captain Morales was involved, it meant the enemy had rank, resources, and plenty of ways to make him disappear. Walter glanced at the clock. He needed to plan carefully for the upcoming confrontation. A direct assault. Not wise. He'd be alone, outgunned, but stealth, cunning, and the element of surprise had always been his calling cards. His phone buzzed. He picked it up warily. Unknown number. For a moment he thought to ignore it. Middle age had made him cautious. But something propelled him to answer. A gravelly voice spoke. "Walter Pierce?" He recognized that voice instantly. An old friend, Valerie King, formerly in the same intelligence unit. She had left the service years ago under mysterious circumstances. "Valerie," he said quietly, "been a while." "Word travels fast," she said. "I heard about your fiasco with Delgado." "I didn't think the news would reach you," Walter replied. "You stay out of the limelight these days." "I do," she said, a touch of bitterness in her tone. "But a friend in the precinct gave me the heads up. Figured you might need a little help." Walter exhaled. He remembered how, back in the day, Valerie had once saved his life in a sting operation. She was methodical, brilliant with infiltration, and unafraid to bend the rules when justice demanded it. "I'm going to meet the White Fangs at the old barge tomorrow night," Walter said. "They are smuggling weapons. Delgado confirmed it." Valerie's voice was grim. "You know they'll be expecting trouble," Walter nodded to himself. "All the more reason to strike before they bury the evidence." "But I can't trust the police. This has to be off the books." Valerie was silent for a moment. "I'll be your off-site support. I've got surveillance gear we can rig. If this is as big as I suspect, you want eyes and ears at a distance. We can catch them in the act if we play it right." Walter allowed the barest smile. "Thanks. And hey, be careful. I don't want you caught in this crossfire." She scoffed lightly. "You forget. I'm a big girl, Pierce. You always were too gallant." They spoke a few more minutes, hammering out a plan, then ended the call. Walter stared at his reflection in the window overlooking the quiet city street. Tomorrow could very well change his life, or end it. He muttered another saying that had brought him comfort in darker days: "Steel is forged in the hottest flames." He was bracing for an inferno. The next night the moon was a pale disk reflected in the ripples of Swan River. The abandoned barge loomed in the darkness like a rusted beast. Walter crouched behind a cluster of rotting crates on the pier, scanning the shadows. Valerie's hushed voice filtered through the earpiece he wore. She'd set up a vantage point in a shuttered watchtower a quarter-mile away. "Be advised," she whispered. "Multiple contacts moving on the starboard side of the barge, all armed." Walter peered through his night vision binoculars. Sure enough, he counted at least 7 figures, each carrying rifles or submachine guns. Shipping containers rested on the barge deck, which was lit by a flickering spotlight. He recognized the logo of a known arms manufacturer, likely smuggled goods. This was bigger than small-time corruption. He eased forward. He'd come unannounced, no official backup, no chance for betrayal. He wore dark clothing, gloves, a small sidearm holstered at his waist, and a formidable sense of purpose. Valerie had her remote surveillance ready to capture any incriminating exchange on a secure feed. As midnight approached, headlights illuminated the rickety pier. 3 SUVs rolled up, tires crunching on gravel. Walter flattened himself behind the crates. The doors opened and a tall figure emerged. Captain Morales, face as stern as a carved statue. Beside him was a slender older woman in a neat blouse and skirt, her posture rigid, her eyes like cold steel. Walter felt a twist in his gut. This had to be someone high up, maybe even the rumored official who gave the White Fangs their political cover. He heard Morales speak, the wind carrying fragments of conversation. "Everything's in place, Miss Becker. Weapons loaded, payment confirmed." Becker nodded. "We'll keep the patrol schedule light. My associates want this done quietly. Senator Davenport expects results, Morales." Walter's spine tingled at the name. Senator Davenport was a local power player, rumored to have presidential ambitions. If he was bankrolling the White Fangs, then they had deep pockets and the means to silence anyone. This operation had grown from a local smuggling ring into a full-blown conspiracy that scaled into the upper echelons of government. Walter edged forward, sliding around an old forklift. A guard stood nearby, scanning the perimeter. Walter waited for the guard's gaze to shift, then crept behind him. With swift precision, he clamped a hand over the guard's mouth and applied a chokehold. The man went limp in seconds. He eased him down silently. From his earpiece, Valerie's urgent whisper, "Walter, you have 2 more hostiles moving in your direction. I see them flanking the crates along the water." "Copy," Walter murmured. He ducked low, slid behind some barrels. 2 armed men passed by, their conversation tense but quiet. "Morales said no mistakes," one hissed. "Deliver the goods. Get the payoff. Vanish. If that Pierce guy shows up, we drop him." Walter took a slow breath. If they only knew he was right beneath their noses. He let them move on. Tonight wasn't about shooting everyone in sight. It was about getting undeniable proof that would blow this conspiracy wide open. He placed a tiny wireless camera on the corner of a container, aimed at Morales and Becker. Through the earpiece, Valerie whispered in excitement, "Perfect angle, Walter. I see them. They're hooking up the weapon crates now. Morales is transferring data from a laptop. I'm capturing everything." Walter risked inching forward. He spotted a small cluster of shipping manifests, half crumpled in a folder. That could be a key piece of evidence. But it lay on a table well lit by the barge's overhead lamp, right in the line of sight of 2 more armed guards. A direct approach would be suicide. A memory flitted through Walter's mind. His old commanding officer once told him, "When you can't go through the door, break a window." He glanced upward, noticing a precariously hung crane hook overhead, suspended by a single cable. If he timed it right, he gritted his teeth. This would be risky. But risk was the only option left. He retrieved a small multi-tool from his pocket, aimed a small beam at the crane's control box on the barge deck. With the right angle, maybe he could send an electrical surge that would lower that hook. He maneuvered behind another crate and fiddled quickly with the device, bridging circuits. Sparks jumped, and the crane suddenly jerked. The heavy metal hook screeched along its track and clanged to the deck, startling everyone on board. "What the?" Morales barked. Panic flared among the guards. Some scrambled to check the crane mechanism. Others fanned out, weapons raised. The immediate confusion gave Walter exactly the moment he needed. He lunged forward, staying low, and grabbed the shipping manifests off the table. Then he ducked behind a generator. Valerie spoke rapidly in his ear. "They know something's up. I see at least 10 guards rushing to search the barge. Walter, you have to move now." He slipped the documents under his jacket. That alone, combined with the live footage, could be enough to expose Morales, Becker, and maybe even Senator Davenport. But not if he didn't get out alive. He made a break for the edge of the barge, weaving between crates and steel beams, heart hammering. Gunshots suddenly echoed, bullets ricocheting off metal. Walter dove behind a cluster of pipes, cursing under his breath. They'd spotted him. The muzzle flashes lit up the night, and the acrid smell of gunpowder stung his nostrils. Valerie's frantic whisper was in his ear. "Walter, keep moving. I've called an anonymous tip to some allies who aren't corrupt. They'll take time to get here, but you just have to hold on." He risked a glance. Guards were converging from his left, Morales from the right. Up ahead was a rusted walkway leading to the pier. He sprinted, bullets whizzing past, slamming into the floor behind him. One bullet tore the fabric of his sleeve. He clenched his jaw against the burn of near misses. Morales's voice roared, "Pierce, you show yourself or we'll cut you down." Walter wanted to laugh at the notion. Show himself? He was used to being a ghost. Another bullet pinged off the walkway rail. He retaliated with 2 quick shots from his sidearm, forcing the shooters to duck. Then came a shout, "He's heading for the bow!" The footsteps thundered after him. He felt cornered. The front of the barge offered little cover, just the open river beyond. Jumping into that cold, murky water was an option, but it could be fatal under a hail of bullets. Still, it might be the only choice. He recalled an old expression, "A cornered fox is more dangerous than a jackal at large." Gathering his courage, he lunged over the barge's edge, plunging headlong into the frigid river. The water enveloped him like a shock wave, the cold seizing his lungs. He surfaced only briefly for air before diving again, letting the current carry him away from the barge. Gunfire ripped through the water around him, but in the dim moonlight aiming was difficult, and the swirling current offered him cover. After what felt like hours, but likely was just a few minutes, he reached a sandy bank downstream. He crawled onto the shore, panting, soaked to the bone and trembling. He wiped water from his eyes, scanning for pursuit. No one was visible behind him, only darkness. He was, for the moment, safe. Valerie's frantic voice burst in his ear. "Walter! Walter, are you—" He coughed, pressing the earpiece. "I'm alive. Got the manifests. You get the video?" "All of it," she confirmed breathlessly. "We have more than enough to blow this open. The question is, who do we trust to take this to?" Walter sat shivering, hands pressed to his knees, thinking. If Morales and half the precinct were compromised, the only chance was to find someone outside the local police, someone beyond the White Fangs' reach. He swallowed a lungful of air. "We might need to go higher. Federal investigators, or I have an old contact in the district attorney's office who might still be clean." Valerie agreed. "Send me the scans, I'll piece them with the footage, then we can figure out how to deliver it. But you need to get warm, Walter. You'll catch your death out there." He exhaled, recalling a phrase his mother used to say, "Better to catch a cold doing right than to stay warm doing wrong." He forced a grin, ignoring the dull ache in his shoulder. "Don't worry about me. Let's just bring them down." He pulled himself up, forced his legs to move. This was only the beginning of a much larger war. Hours later, in the back room of a humble antique shop run by one of Valerie's trustworthy cousins, Walter and Valerie spread out their evidence. The battered shipping manifests, the videos she'd captured, digital files gleaned from the transmissions overhead. They made for a staggering trove of corruption, arms trafficking, payments siphoned through a web of shell companies, direct links implicating Captain Morales, Ms. Becker, and even a notation with Senator Davenport's initials. If that senator was giving orders, the White Fangs had official cover from the highest seats of power. Valerie tapped a finger on the laptop screen. "We release this the wrong way, it disappears. They have people in multiple agencies. We need an ally with clout, someone with a reason to protect the truth." Walter scratched at the stubble on his chin. "I have an acquaintance, Carolyn Delgado. She's no relation to Officer Delgado. She's an assistant district attorney. Her father was indicted by the White Fangs years ago for refusing to comply with their demands. She's been quietly gathering intelligence. If we bring this to her, she might risk her career to see it through, but she's honest." Valerie nodded. "It's worth a shot. But we should do it fast before Morales or Davenport gets wind we're still breathing." Walter looked at her, his eyes reflecting equal measures of determination and exhaustion. "And how long before the White Fangs make a move on you?" "You're complicit now." She waved a hand. "I can handle them. Don't worry about me." A shadow crossed her face. The only thing that concerns me is how ruthless they are. This is no petty ring. They kill to keep secrets. Walter's heart sank as he thought of Lena, his daughter, who lived out of state but visited often. Could the White Fangs use her against him if they discovered his personal life? Fear gripped him, but he swallowed it down. He had to press on. Let's wrap this up. The sooner we blow the whistle, the safer our loved ones will be. Yet he couldn't have known just how far the White Fangs would go. Sometimes, evil extends its tendrils to the most vulnerable places. They arranged a secret meeting with Caroline Delgado in a public park the next day, the kind of place where families fed ducks and the aroma of grilled hot dogs wafted from a nearby stand. Walter wore a simple jacket and baseball cap, face partially concealed. Valerie kept her distance, scanning the area for any watchers. Caroline arrived wearing a casual sweater and jeans, blending in as if out for a stroll. Walter handed her a thumb drive. This has it all: shipping logs, video of Morales and Becker discussing a weapons deal, references to payoffs from Senator Davenport's people. Caroline's eyes widened at the mention of Davenport. God, Walter, if this is true, you're risking your life. Davenport is unstoppable in local politics. Rumor is he's aiming at a presidential run next cycle. Walter's jaw tightened, which is why we can't let him get away with it. Caroline nodded. I'll do everything I can. I have a friend in the Federal Investigations Unit, but we'll need to be careful. If the White Fangs have an inside man, they'll try to bury this. Valerie murmured from behind them. Watch yourselves. We might have eyes on us. She nodded toward a middle-aged couple walking a dog, glancing over a bit too intently. Caroline hurried away with the drive. Walter and Valerie strolled in another direction, pretending to admire the lake. Once Caroline was out of sight, they made for the park exit, but something felt off. A battered sedan idled near the curb, engine running, tinted windows. Just as they passed by, the driver's side door opened. A barrel-chested man in a windbreaker stepped out, eyes hard, hand drifting toward something at his belt. Valerie hissed, "Time to go." They quickened their pace, weaving through the crowd of families and joggers, vanishing among them. The man didn't risk open confrontation in such a public space. Once they rounded a corner, they ducked into a cab. Walter exhaled, tension coiled in every muscle. They'd rattled the nest, and the hornets were swarming. Over the next 24 hours, developments spiraled. Caroline managed to pass the thumb drive to her contact in the Federal Investigations Unit, but no official moves were made. Walter was certain the White Fangs were pulling strings to delay any warrants or arrests. Then, on a gloomy evening, everything changed. Walter was sitting in a modest diner with Valerie, picking at a bowl of soup, when his phone vibrated with a text from an unknown number. The message reads, "We have Lena Pierce. One more step and she dies. Bring all evidence to the abandoned print factory on Trenchant Street. Alone. 10 p.m. Walter's face went ashen. Lena? She wasn't even in town. Or so he thought. She must have come in for a surprise visit, or maybe they'd lured her. Dread churned in his stomach. Valerie glanced at him and saw the stricken look. "Walter, what happened?" He handed her the phone, his hands trembling. She read it, color draining from her cheeks. "They took your daughter." She looked at him gravely. "We can't give them the evidence. It's the only chance we have of stopping them." Walter raked a hand through his hair. "But Lena, they'll kill her if we don't comply." Valerie set her jaw, steel entering her voice. "Then we do what we do best. We go in, we get her out, and we ensure these monsters never threaten anyone again." She placed a reassuring hand over his. "They made this personal. Now they have no idea how badly they've just motivated you to take them down." Walter felt tears prick the corners of his eyes. He thought of Lena's bright smile, the proud day she earned her scholarship. He couldn't let these criminals hurt her. "Let's do it," he whispered. "No half measures." Valerie nodded, flipping open her laptop. "I have the building schematics from years ago. We'll find a way inside. We'll take them by surprise. But we need cunning. Your infiltration skills and a bit of backup. I'll call in a favor from a retired friend of ours, Everett Kwan, ex-Special Ops. He owes me. He might be able to help us slip in quietly." Walter murmured an old quote he'd once recited to Lena. Sometimes justice is the thunder that follows lightning, and right now he intended to be both lightning and thunder. Just before 10 that night, a cold wind rustled the leaves around the abandoned print factory. The structure stood silent, a hulk of rusted metal and broken windows. The front was boarded up, but Walter suspected a more discreet operation inside. He, Valerie, and Everett parked a block away, proceeding on foot. They'd planned meticulously. Everett, a wiry man with alert eyes, spoke softly. "I'll circle around back and set a diversion. Valerie, you position yourself on the west side to take out any snipers or watchers. Walter goes in through the lower basement entrance we found on the blueprint." Walter flicked off the safety on his handgun, heart pounding with urgency. "And Lena, we must find her as soon as we're in." Valerie squeezed his shoulder. "We will." As they approached the building, a single floodlight illuminated the empty parking lot. Walter's ear caught the distant hum of a generator. No sign of immediate guards, but that hardly meant no one was inside. He carefully prized open a rusted basement access door. Valerie and Everett split off, each disappearing into the shadows. Inside, the basement smelled of mold and stagnant water. Flickering fluorescent lights guided him through a maze of old machinery. He moved slowly, gun raised, ears straining for a sound. A cough, a shoe scuffle, anything that might indicate Lena's location. Then, from above, a faint cry. "Dad." Lena's voice. It came from an upper floor. Walter's pulse hammered. He nearly dashed headlong up the stairs, but forced himself to remain cautious. At the top of the staircase, a door opened onto the main factory floor. Rows of printing presses stood like silent sentinels from another era. In the center of that vast space stood Lena, hands tied behind her back, guarded by 2 men armed with pistols, and in front of her, wearing a smug, cruel grin, was Miss Becker from the barge. Next to Becker stood a tall man with slicked-back hair, Senator Davenport himself, apparently deciding that if you want something done right, you do it personally. The hush of the place magnified every step Walter took as he emerged from the shadows. Becker spotted him first. "Right on time, Pierce." Walter's gaze flew to Lena's tear-stained face. She was alive, which meant they still needed leverage. Davenport stepped forward, holding out a hand. "I assume you brought our evidence. Hand it over and your daughter lives. Resist and—" He let the threat linger, snapping his fingers toward the armed men, who raised their weapons at Lena's back. Walter's voice turned hoarse with rage. "You let her go first," a scoff from Becker. "We're not amateurs, Pierce. Drop your weapon, slide any devices you have across the floor." Walter wanted to fight, to do anything but comply, but Lena's desperate eyes pinned him. He lowered his gun, kicked it away, and raised both hands. "All right, just don't hurt her." Davenport stepped closer. "Did you really think you could take us down? We run this city. Police, politicians, judges, so many are on our payroll. You're an annoyance at best." Walter felt a flicker of hope. Valerie and Everett must be in position by now. He simply had to stall. "You're a disgrace," he said, voice shaking. "All your power and you use it to terrorize people." Davenport sneered. "Power means controlling others. Spare me the morality speech, old man." Becker pulled out a phone. "This is your last chance, Pierce. Where's the evidence?" Walter let a shadow of a smile cross his face. "The truth? It's already uploaded. We've broadcasted to safe servers, and soon the entire network will see you've lost." He saw a flicker of uncertainty in Davenport's eyes. Then Davenport's face twisted in anger. "You lying!" He lunged forward, pressing a gun barrel to Walter's temple. Lena screamed. One of the guards yanked her back roughly. Walter's mind raced. Valerie had told him to keep them talking until she could strike. He prayed he had enough time. "It's done," he insisted. "Your secrets are out, Davenport. I bet your face is on half the news channels by now." Davenport's eyes flared with manic fury. We'll see about that. Becker, kill the girl. We'll finish him next. Lena let out a terrified sob. Walter's heart froze in his chest. Just then, a crash echoed from the far side of the factory. Gunshots erupted. Now, Walter thought. Valerie's voice boomed from a catwalk overhead. Drop your weapons! She fired a shot that took out one guard. The factory floor erupted in chaos. Everett, from behind a stack of crates, fired precise rounds, forcing the other guard to dive for cover. Walter seized the moment, slamming an elbow into Davenport's gut. Davenport staggered, the gun jolting upward as it fired, sending a bullet ricocheting off metal columns. Lena spun away from her captor, who was now focused on returning fire at Valerie's vantage point. Walter lunged forward, ignoring the ache in his aging muscles, tackling Becker to the ground. She clawed at him, eyes wild. "Valerie, get Lena!" he shouted. Valerie slid down a support beam and rushed to Lena, swiftly slicing her bonds with a small knife. Lena collapsed into Valerie's arms, sobbing, eyes brimming with relief. Amid the gunfire, Davenport scrambled behind a press machine, lobbing curses. He fired recklessly, forcing Everett to retreat behind a steel column. Bullets sparked off the floor. The factory was a maelstrom of shrieking metal and muzzle flashes. Walter wrested a pistol from Becker's grip, pinning her arm, but she managed to twist free, delivering a savage kick to his ribs. He gasped, but retaliated with a clenched fist across her jaw. She crumpled, dazed. He grabbed the dropped pistol, breathing hard. In that moment, Davenport emerged from cover, targeting Lena with a vicious glare. "Enough of this," he snarled, taking aim. Walter felt his heart seize. He had no clear shot, and Davenport's finger was already on the trigger. Time slowed to a crawl. Then Everett, stepping out of the shadows, calmly fired a single shot into Davenport's shoulder. The senator's face contorted in pain as the gun dropped from his hand. He staggered, collapsing against the machine with a dull clang. Silence fell, broken only by ragged breathing. Becker lay on the concrete, barely conscious. Davenport bled from a wound in his shoulder, cursing through clenched teeth. Valerie guided Lena safely behind a press. Walter lowered his pistol, every cell in his body trembling with adrenaline. Lena's tearful eyes found his. "Dad," she whispered. He rushed to her side, enveloping her in a fierce hug, tears of relief sliding down his cheeks. "Thank God you're okay," he murmured. Valerie and Everett exchanged a triumphant nod. They'd done what they came to do. And in the distance, faint sirens began to wail, a sign that for once, law enforcement was on the right side. Caroline must have mobilized the uncorrupted agents. The White Fangs had run out of time. Outside, red and blue lights flooded the empty lot, fanning across shattered windows. Dozens of federal agents, backed by a handful of local officers who weren't on the White Fangs' payroll, stormed in. They confiscated weapons, slapped cuffs on Davenport and Becker. It was a scene of justice, tearing through the gloom like dawn's first light. In the aftermath, Walter helped Lena out to the paramedics, who examined her for any injuries. She was shaken but unharmed. Valerie debriefed the agents on the evidence. Everett stood watchfully, arms folded, scanning the horizon as though expecting more trouble. An older federal agent approached Walter, introducing himself as Agent Rolfe. "We've got your files, plus testimony from Delgado. Captain Morales is in custody, along with Becker. This is, well, I have no words. You've exposed an entire ring, possibly saved thousands of lives from illegal weapons. And Davenport, he'll be facing charges that go all the way to the top." Walter closed his eyes in a quiet moment of victory. "Then it's done." Rolfe offered a tight smile. "It's only beginning, in some ways, but you can breathe easier now." Across the lot, Lena ran to Walter, tears glimmering. She wrapped her arms around him, burying her face in his chest. "Dad, I was so scared," she murmured. He stroked her hair gently. "So was I. But we made it. We faced them down." He blinked away the sting of tears, recalling a quote his grandmother used to say, "Even in the darkest hour, a single lantern can show the path." In the days that followed, the media exploded with headlines. Senator Davenport's name became synonymous with scandal. Corruption charges were levied against high-ranking officials across the city. The White Fangs collapsed under the weight of federal indictments. Caroline Delgado, the assistant district attorney, led a formidable case that had criminals and crooked politicians alike scrambling to cut plea deals. Walter, for his part, remained mostly behind the scenes. He had no appetite for fame. His only desire was to see Lena safe and the community freed from the White Fangs' grip. In a modest motel on the edge of town, he, Valerie, Everett, and Lena gathered for a quiet dinner. The news played on a muted television in the corner, showing images of Davenport in handcuffs, flanked by FBI agents. Lena stared at her father with admiration. "You really do lead the most interesting life, Dad. I had no clue." He offered a weary smile. "I'm sorry you had to find out this way, sweetheart, but I've always believed in one principle. If you have the power to stop evil, you must use it." Valerie grinned, lifting a plastic cup in a mock toast. "Here's to you, Walter, and a job well done. For once, the good guys came out on top." Everett chuckled. "Reminds me of an old line from a Western my father loved. The law might be slow, but it gets there in the end, if the right folks push it along." They laughed gently. The tension of the past week still lingered, but the relief was palpable. Lena leaned her head on Walter's shoulder. He squeezed her hand, heart brimming with gratitude. Finally, early one morning, Walter and Lena found themselves in a quiet diner near the highway. They sipped coffee, reading the paper. The headlines declared the downfall of Senator Davenport and his accomplices. Another page praised the unknown whistleblowers who had risked everything to expose corruption. Walter's name wasn't mentioned. He preferred it that way. Lena set down her mug. "So, Dad, what do you do now? Go back to your quiet life?" He contemplated the question. "A quiet life might be nice," he said, though his eyes twinkled with the knowledge that heroes rarely get to rest for long. "But I've got a feeling there's always another threat out there, another person who needs help. I can't just turn a blind eye." She nodded, understanding. "Whatever you decide, I'm proud of you." He gazed at her fondly. "Thank you. And remember this, no matter how dark things seem, no matter how powerful the enemy, there is always hope. Sometimes you have to be the one to light that torch." Lena smiled, tears shining in her eyes. "I'll remember." They finished their coffee, settled the bill, and stepped outside into the crisp morning air. Walter slipped his arm around Lena's shoulders, leading her down the sidewalk as the sun crested the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold. Life, for now, would go on. And if trouble ever came calling again, Walter Pierce was ready to face it, head high, heart steady, guided by the unwavering conviction that no evil is truly invincible. Sometimes life teaches its lessons through trials by fire, forging wisdom in the crucible of strife. And as Walter would often remind Lena whenever she expressed doubt in the goodness of humanity, storms may rage, but they don't last forever. Courage is the compass that brings us home. He hoped that was a lesson the world, too, could learn. In the aftermath of these events, people around the city discovered a renewed sense of faith in justice. Corruption, while never fully disappearing, had been dealt a catastrophic blow. Davenport's accomplices who remained at large found fewer hiding places and fewer allies willing to risk their own lives for a sinking ship. Caroline Delgado rose in respect among her peers for her unwavering dedication to truth. Walter Pierce, Valerie King, and Everett Kwan chose, for the most part, to slip back into relative anonymity. They understood that the real heroes were those everyday citizens who refused to give in to fear. In quiet reflection, they'd agree that a city is not saved by a single grand gesture, but by countless small acts of courage. It's said that scars are a testament to survival, and Walter bore his quietly. He carried the memory of gunfights in the dark, heart-pounding chases, near brushes with death. Yet out of these scars came wisdom he'd share with Lena, especially in her darker moments. He reminded her of an old phrase beloved by many middle-aged folks who've weathered storms. It's never too late to do the right thing. And he would add his own corollary, no matter how high the walls of deception, the truth can scale them. In a broader sense, Walter's story became a symbol, even if most never knew his name. People realized that standing up to a mighty villain requires not just personal skill, but a collective will. And in the diners, parks, and workplaces, folks started talking again about integrity, about lending a hand to neighbors in distress, about refusing to bow to intimidation. Every so often, Lena would flash back to that terrifying night in the print factory. She would wake with a gasp, remembering the muzzle of a gun pointed her way. But then she'd recall the unwavering love in her father's eyes, the moment Valerie's voice cut through the chaos, the final clang of Davenport collapsing. And she'd find solace in one of her father's favorite quotes. "We may tremble at the thunder, but it's the lightning that shows us where we stand." She understood now what it meant to stand firm. As for Walter, he cherished the routine joys. A quiet sunrise walk, a fresh cup of coffee, a phone call from Lena, the knowledge that criminals who had enslaved the city's integrity were behind bars. He saw to it that Delgado, who'd once tried to frame him, faced justice, but was also given a chance to testify against the White Fangs, an opportunity for a measure of redemption. Life never returned to a perfect simplicity, of course. There would always be shadows waiting to creep in, new threats lurking in corners. But the triumph against the White Fangs served as proof that corruption, while deeply rooted, was not all-powerful. Good people united could uproot it, and from time to time Walter found himself offering quiet counsel to those caught in moral dilemmas. Quoting his father's old saying, "Decisions shape destinies. Choose with honor." Middle-aged city workers, restless youths, or newly minted officers would come to him, seeking guidance or a steady voice in a storm of uncertainty. He never turned them away. In time, the city, though battered by scandal, began to heal. The story of a retired intelligence operative who had shattered a criminal empire circulated in hushed tones, inspiring those who heard it to believe in something better. If one determined soul could make such a difference, perhaps many more could as well. Some months later, on a bright summer afternoon, Walter stood atop a small hill in a local park. He could see people laughing, children playing, a hot dog vendor calling out friendly greetings. Lena joined him, hooking an arm around his. He watched her with a soft smile, so grateful she was safe. "Dad," she said gently, "do you ever miss your old life?" He looked at her, knowing she referred to his intelligence days, the hush-hush missions. He gave a thoughtful smile. "Sometimes I do, but I've come to realize that every chapter in life has a purpose. The key is to serve that purpose without losing who you are." She grinned. "You did that. You always stay true to yourself." He nodded, leaning on the railing that overlooked the park. "I tried. And if there's one lesson I've learned, it's that we can't wait for someone else to protect us from the dark. Sometimes we have to light the lantern ourselves." Lena laughed softly. "You and your sayings. They help remind me," Walter said, "that no matter how old we are, we can still choose to be brave." She leaned her head against his shoulder. "I love you, Dad." "I love you too, sweetheart," he murmured, eyes glistening. "And I love this city, flawed as it is. Because as long as there are good people willing to stand up for what's right, there's hope." He drew in a deep breath, feeling the warmth of the sun on his face. In that moment he felt an unshakable peace. He would always be ready if trouble returned. But for now, it was enough to watch families enjoying the day, safe from the White Fangs' menace. Evil had lost this round, sorely, and that was cause for a quiet, profound victory. Throughout any story of triumph and tribulation, there are lessons etched deep into the soul, lessons that ring especially true for those in their middle years who've seen life's joys and hardships. First, no one is too insignificant to make a stand. Walter Pierce might have been a man alone, but his tenacity and moral core ignited a chain reaction that toppled powerful figures. As a wise voice once said, "A single spark can burn down a forest of lies." Second, alliances are forged through shared ideals, not just convenience. Valerie, Everett, Caroline, each offered their unique strengths and principles. It took a united front to overcome the White Fangs. As an old proverb goes, when spiders unite, they can tie down a lion. Third, the power of truth is greater than the power of fear. Senator Davenport and his associates built an empire on intimidation and deceit, but the truth exposed them. Even though fear momentarily cast a long shadow, truth became the hammer that shattered their fortress. Fourth, family and loved ones give us the strength to persevere. Walter's resolve was fueled by his love for Lena. In the direst moments, that love was the beacon guiding him through darkness. Or, in the words of many a middle-aged philosopher, home is not just a place, it's the people we fight for. Finally, redemption is possible, even for those who stumble. Officer Delgado was complicit in wrongdoing, but through confession and cooperation he began to atone. This reminder is powerful for those who believe in second chances. While breath remains, hope remains. Walter Pierce's story is about more than exposing a corrupt network. It's about the human spirit's capacity to push back against overwhelming odds. It's about the quiet heroism that resides in us all, waiting for the moment we choose to become the lantern instead of cursing the dark. And as Walter himself would say with a gentle smile, don't let the years weigh you down from standing tall for what is right. The sunset of life can still burn brighter than any dawn. Such is the legacy of one man's struggle, a spark that lit a revolution of truth, a testament that reminds us all, no matter how powerful the storm, the sun rises again. And with each sunrise, we have a chance to choose courage, compassion, and conviction, forging a future where justice stands firm against corruption's trembling walls.